As a police leader who has responded to many mental health calls, I recognize the need for tools that enhance collaboration between behavioral health and law enforcement. Gelada simplifies co-responder and crisis response programs with smarter data and communication solutions. For a demo, visit julata.com or check the show notes. That's JULOTA.com.
There's a part of me that's like, don't walk by that rig. But there's a part of me that's like, I wanted to see that kid like come to. I wanted to see that kid moving. And I see his little feet. And I'm like, why did you do that?
I don't remember this. I thought they both drove away from me, but one drove in front of me, ended up shooting me in the stomach.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by a failed retired police officer, instructor, polygrapher, background dude, and violent assault survivor. So we'll go there too. But Donovan Heavener, thank you, sir. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure, man. So can you give the listeners a crash course? I gave some of the different titles you hold, such as failed retiree, because you're working and you're instructing. Right. You're active on the police applicant podcast with our friend Ken. Shout out to Ken Roybal. But yeah, if you could give us a crash course about you, there's so many things I want to highlight, and I'm kind of giving that teaser. So obviously people that are in the career can learn a lot from how you've overcome adversity and continue to have purpose. Shoot, I even want to talk about how you're always propping up and supporting and volunteering with the Special Olympics and Torch Run and those fantastic events and efforts. So without further ado, though, I'm going to turn it over to you, and please just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into law enforcement.
All right. Yeah. So I'm born and raised in the Midwest, Wisconsin boy, diehard Packer fan. So, you know, that game's coming up. I can't wait for the game coming up. But I started getting into law enforcement was actually a happy accident. Never wanted to be in law enforcement. I was the punk rocker with the mohawk skateboarder who was running from the cops all the time through high school.
Nice. Yeah.
But I started off as a theater arts major when I went to college. I was
no way.
Yeah, I was heavy into stage productions. I did a lot of the backstage work. I wasn't an actor or anything. I loved the scene work. I loved lighting and sound and all that stuff.
Nice.
But what people find out is when they get to college, they need money. And that was what happened with me. And the only place hiring was the police department on campus. So I took a job with them writing parking tickets. They had this group of criminal justice majors that would help the officers at night on patrols. I wanted to do that. They gave me an opportunity, even though I wasn't a criminal justice major. And I went out one night, and I think within a couple of weeks, I was in talking to the CJ department, asking how I changed my major because I was hooked. So I fell in love with it. Felt I was really good at it because I knew being on the wrong side of it, what to expect from people. So I just took off from there. I got hired by the Brown County Sheriff's Department in Wisconsin a couple months after graduation. That covers the Green Bay area. Spent about 2.5 years there. Really enjoyed it. I'm just not a winter guy. I don't like the snow. I hate the snow. So Wisconsin was a horrible place for me to be born.
Midwest is not a great place then. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like 1996. I was looking for something on the West Coast, and on a bulletin board, someone had put out that brand new police department was starting up Federal Way. And I thought, well, I might as well give it a shot, see if they'll hire me. Did all my testing in the Minneapolis area. I came out the Federal Way for maybe a day and a half and just said, this is the place I want to be. And came out. I was the 16th officer hired. And man, I really got into it real quick with Federal Way, helping start up the traffic unit. I was one of the first motor officers, one of the first reconstructionists. So I had a lot of great times at the very beginning. And then 2002, my wife took me back to Wisconsin kicking and screaming because she wanted the kids by relatives. So
Mm-hmm.
worked for two small agencies back there, a village, and then my alma mater. I was a sergeant there for quite a while, 9 years. But in 96, when my kids ended up graduating from college, getting out on their own, I knew I always wanted to be back here. My wife wanted to be back here. I was fortunate enough that Federal Way opened the door for me and let me come back, and I was able to finish out my career with Federal Way. So that's kind of like the snapshot of me and my professional life. You know, I big agency, small agency, university, county, I got it all. So,
yeah, I love that. I love the open-mindedness, and I think that there is an intention for a part 2 episode, which is a lot of like the hiring and coming in and the background aspect. You know, you were an academy instructor, you're still instructing, and then the polygraph, right? That daunting, scary polygraph that we all have to do. A lot of emotions with that. So we'll get into that too. But I like how you give the nod to that punk rock kid. I mean, there's even like this whole like kind of this like micro culture of like punk rock cops, right? A lot of cops that like they grew up kind of anti-establishment, and then they find their purpose in all these ways. But I still think that there's a lot that actually overlaps with cops and wanting just to be real. And a lot of times, like, you got to be the man, you got to, lay down the law, like proverbially and literally. But most cops aren't really trying to mess with someone that's doing their thing. Right. It's just trying to protect others' rights to do their thing, in a way that's not affecting others negatively. So I think that is helpful to hear, especially when we get into the background conversation. Some people are worried about the things they did. Shoot, I did a lot of things too. Mostly in college was most of my mistakes, but I own them all outrightly. And that's why I'm here.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, when I would pull up on a call, I mean, I really worked during the time when everyone was calling in the skateboarders, here, skateboarders there. We were chasing them around yet. I never liked chasing them, but when I pulled up and I was playing the music that they like skateboarding to, I'd be able to grab their deck and do a couple of tricks. They had a better respect for me. I think I was able to communicate with them better, and I think that was something that really came to my advantage. And I was able to communicate a lot better with people who didn't really like law enforcement.
Yeah, I can see that, and that goes back to things that I learned later, which are just be a person, be yourself. Really, like, I mean, the more I age, I think that I just realized like I'm best when I'm myself. Like. Not like you can't change. No, I should be the best version of myself, but don't try to be something you're not. Don't try to be a robot. People don't like it. They don't connect with it. They want to connect, right? So the music is a huge one. I've heard so many people use music as like the breaking of the barrier when someone's in the back of the car, like, hey man, what do you want to listen to? Oh, I actually like that. And then they start talking about it.
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What was that like being a founding member, OG of a new city, new everything, right? Like, there's no defined culture. And we talk about culture all the time here on the podcast.
Yeah. So when I started at Federal Way, we had no uniforms. We had no patrol vehicles, nothing. We had a mannequin that had a sample uniform on it and what we thought the patch was going to look like. We were picking out equipment for the car. So it was a great opportunity. But I mean, I had 2.5 years in law enforcement. I didn't, and from Green Bay, I mean, 67,000 people in that area. I think maybe we had 100,000 people in the county. It was a huge culture shock to me coming here. But for me to come in and instead of having to sit down and read policies and procedures, because we didn't have any, they just put me at a desk and said, hey, we need to hire 100 officers. Here's a stack of files. Start doing some backgrounds. And that was awesome. A great experience for a young guy coming in. And thankfully I had an open mind. I didn't mind doing the work. So that was good. I mean, we represented 23 different states along with those that were from Washington. So when we would go to calls, we had umpteen different styles of how we were going to handle it. Cause again, I think we went our first 2.5, almost 3 years with no policies or procedures. No guiding direction. We had lieutenants from around the country who had different views on it. So it was an interesting time, but I think that time with Federal Way really formed who I was and how I ended up being the person I am in law enforcement.
Yeah, that's nuts. I mean, you say like no policies, no procedures, and I think that most of the audience, depending on maybe their time on or the type of cop they are or their rank and role, like that's either absolutely terrifying or that's the most badass thing ever. just like roll with it, just figure it
Yeah.
out.
And it's both. It is badass. You're thinking, yeah, I don't have anything that's directing me. I can do what I want. But on the other hand, you're like, I got nothing protecting me.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's protecting the decisions I'm making. So that was
Yes.
a nerve-wracking thing, when you had to kick that door and you're like, well, okay, I got state law, but I don't have my department backing me right now. And
Mm-hmm.
we had some stressful situations where administration didn't agree with what was done, and some people were, put through some unnecessary investigations that if we had policies and procedures, I don't think it would have happened.
Yeah, I think that is a good note, right? It means a lot more to have that context and you illustrate that for the listenership, regardless of how many years you have on. Yeah, it may feel like all these laws are, and these maybe rather the policies are so restrictive, but I think that most people, when they remove the emotion and they remove the specific incident, when they look at it like in the big picture, yes, we just want to be on the same page and we want consistency and expectations. So I know where I'm good and I
Mhm.
know where it's getting a little hairy. Maybe I should walk back this way because we want to be on the same page, right? For safety
Right.
tactics, procedure, everything, so that we know what the expected range of outcomes is going to be.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Just for me coming from Wisconsin, our defensive tactics were 100% different than Washington. And I will say our defensive tactics at the time were, I guess, a little more gentle than what was being taught in
Mm.
Washington. So, and everyone again had their differing things on defensive tactics. So it's one of those things. It was a great learning experience. I wish everyone could have had the same experience I had. I think to get a better understanding of how a police department really works. I really got a quick crash course on what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that is a pretty huge thing to try to grapple with and process because a lot of times we talk about why we do things
Mhm.
and we talk about, well, it's because it's always been done that way. And maybe there is a logical track, but when you keep asking why this, okay, and then why, so that you can best understand and then know that that's the best way,
Mhm.
oftentimes we lose track of it, right? So I mean, you're talking about standing up a brand new police department and being one of the founding members of that, which is a very unique experience for sure.
Mhm.
And now at my department, they're talking about building moves, right? Where they're going to shut down, and over the course of a couple of years, we're going to shut down our current physical building, which is not big enough for us. We're, in this other city building across the parking lot. We're going to all shift over there, and the campus. So
Mhm.
we do so many processes and procedures based on our architecture, like literally based on our layout and where everyone has to work, how
Yep.
you interact with people. It actually influences how we do the whole job. And so to be able to not change everything, but kind of blow up that paradigm and say, hey, as we restructure things, what is the best and what decisions will force, what consequences, I suppose, like what is the cause and effect? And of course, you're not going to know them all, but that's just a lot to think about that I think most of us we just have to kind of roll with it at
Right.
times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So with all your reflections, are there any notes that you do give? I don't think that there's any way I can really break it down to like entry level people coming in because there's so much bleed over. But you've worked for big, small, West Coast, Midwest. Like, what are the things that you like to tell people or have told people as they consider this range of police agencies?
Um, every person, I would say, every department isn't for every person. And people get frustrated when they go through the hiring process and they get a rejection from a department. And I just keep reminding them, every department isn't for you. You're not going to be a fit for every department. Um, I can tell you the pros and cons of every agency I worked at. If you like to learn how to do things on your own with very little backup, a county agency is probably your best bet. If you want to figure out how to, if you're that Inspector Gadget kind of guy and you want to figure out how to get things done with the least amount of stuff you have, county's the way to go. If you're one who really likes to have that day-to-day interaction, talking with people all the time, just trying to figure out community problems on a day-to-day basis, a university is a great place to go. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot that goes on there. There's a lot of stuff that's politically driven that you get wrapped up into, but it opens up a lot of great conversations. I mean, I will tell you, during Ferguson, I was on the campus and I learned a lot with the different student groups there. I worked for a small village, 5,000 people. I got to know everyone in the village. My wife actually kind of hated it. We couldn't go to the grocery store. We couldn't go anywhere without me getting cornered by someone. So, but if you, again, that community connection, if that's what you want, great. My time in Federal Way, I will tell you, I had probably the best time of my life. It was go, go, go all the time. You had the hot calls all the time. You did have the opportunity for those community connections, make time to talk with the community. I made some really great friends just from interactions I had from calls. But you had that variety of stuff to do at the bigger agency, like Federal Way. So everything has its place and time for someone. You just have to figure out what you're looking for in an agency and what suits you. I mean, I've talked to some people who I've trained people on the university campus. I'm like, you need to go find a job somewhere else. You're a great officer. You're just not meant for a university campus, and the other way too. I've seen some people, you might want to check out a university that might be better for you, so there's just so many different things when you look at all these agencies, where I feel, again, fortunate. I worked at all of them.
Yeah. No, I like that. It is a pretty unique role, not just to work different agencies or several agencies, but the range, right? You literally talked about a village. When you said a village first, I didn't know if you're blending it back to like, it takes a village. That's why you're moving back to the Midwest to raise your kids with family. I was like, no, you're like legit, like a village.
Legit village, a village of 5,000 people. We bordered a city of, I think it was about 55,000 people. So it was small, but we ended up getting a lot of overflow from them. But again, it was a small community. I was the SRO there for a while. The entire school district for that village was 1,200 students. And when I worked as a school resource officer in Federal Way, that was about the size of the high school I was working at. So
yeah, exactly. And that's what I think a lot of folks like in more metropolitan or kind of suburban areas can recognize. So one of the things that you mentioned, and I kind of want to attribute it to you, and I want to see what you think about that, but it sounds like you stayed really nimble with the job, right? I mean, you literally changed departments a lot, but you also have this really positive disposition that is what I've noticed from the time I met you professionally and now in retirement. And you're not just, kicking back on the beach, which hopefully you are injecting that at times. But as you say, you're more busy than ever in some ways. But, you talked about how maybe someone would get the feedback that university policing is not the right fit for them. And I like that because I thought about things like that post 2020 when people were like, I got to go. And I'm like, do you got to go, or do you got to go to like a different unit or a different department? Because then it keeps more cops in. Maybe you're in a small town, you go to the big county, you're like, oh, this is actually a nice refresh button I hit. And maybe it's not a good fit. Maybe you are done with law enforcement, but at least we like had a shot at it. So I throw all that at you and trying to mesh it back together. Like, have you thought about your career progression and how that influenced your nimbleness and your adaptability and resilience? Or have you thought about contrary, maybe because you did all that, it kept you really fresh and nimble and resilient?
Yeah. And I do look back on it because, you have a lot of people who start at one agency and that's their agency. I always attribute it to, I think I have some ADHD in me. I get bored. A lot of
cops will say that, yeah.
Yeah, I get bored. And after Brown County Sheriff's Department, my first job, whenever I went to a job, I guaranteed them 5 years. I said, I'll give you 5 years. After that, I'm not missing anything. And I've always given more than that 5 years. But what it really comes down to is I was always looking for something new. I mean, I ended up being a sergeant for 9 years when I was back in Wisconsin. And it wasn't a full straight 9 years. When I went to the village, I was hired as an officer. The chief promoted me to sergeant within 6 months because of my experience in Federal Way. And then the school resource officer position opened up, and that was something I've always wanted to do. And a lot of people said I was crazy. They even talked to the psych at the department, and he's like, you need to run him through something. He's turning his stripes in to be a school resource officer. I did. I happily turned my stripes in to be a school resource officer. And I did that for 4 years. And then the chief brought me in the office one day. He's like, hey, I need you back. I need you supervising again. And I said, if that's what you need from me, I'll do that. So I went back to being a sergeant. And I ended up figuring at that agency, I hit the ceiling. I wasn't going to go anywhere. So I moved over to my alma mater, University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. They brought me over as a sergeant. They needed someone there fresh. They needed someone there who was willing to, I don't want to say clean house, but hold people accountable, because that wasn't happening with the current supervisor. And I like those challenges. I don't thrive on like getting people in trouble, but I like being a solution to a problem that's out there, and worked real hard at that. And when it came time, I knew when my time was done at the university that I wanted to come back out here. And for me, coming out here, there was never a second thought. I never thought about promoting once I got back to Federal Way, because I did my time as a supervisor, and I just wanted to finish up. Basically, I always say I want to finish up worrying about myself, and it didn't end up that way. When I was in backgrounds and recruiting, I ended up having to supervise all the new recruits that we hired. And then at my last couple of years, I was a TAC officer, and that's just supervising 30 people in a class, and you have like 8 to 10 classes at a time. So I was still supervising people, but I was able to do what I wanted to do. So I never look back and question my decisions on what I did. I think I did what worked well for me.
Yeah, I like that. I like how you said you did your time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, almost like a sentence.
Yep.
But going back to that, like, what did motivate that move to SRO? Like, I applaud SROs. I think we need to rebrand. I think a lot of places do, right? Where it's not just kind of the pre-retirement gig, but no, we need like some of our best and brightest and most tactical and just most engaged, like production cops to be in that challenging, multifaceted role. But yeah, what was the impetus to that?
Well, first is, I had been coaching for quite a few years at that point, so I had a connection with kids. I really enjoy spending time with kids, helping them grow to be productive young adults. And, the spot opened up, and I just looked at it as there's so many different challenges as an SRO that officers never go through when they work the road. They get just a very small glimpse of what goes on. And my goal was, when I went in as an SRO back at the village and then in Federal Way, was I was not going to be the one who went in there writing tickets all the time. I was the one that went in. I wanted to help the kids find a solution. Obviously, there's the enforcement you have to do. And it's different now with all the new laws on the books. But when I was there, I was able to make the connection with kids. And I had a couple that I had connections with, especially in Federal Way, that you wanted to do everything to keep them from going down the wrong path. But unfortunately, where they were at, you couldn't get them out of it. And their names continued to pop up after I left being an SRO as being involved in things. But it never discouraged me. I had one student who was shot and killed, during a drug deal night before classes started. I had a couple students who were shot during a drug deal again when it was during lunch. And these are all kids I know, and people are like, how do you keep going back? And I'm like, someone's got to do it first off. And I'd much rather have someone in there who wants to be there, make a difference in these kids' life, than being someone who is forced in there and they don't want to have anything to do with the kids and just stay off to the side and wait for the call for help.
Yeah. Did wellness play a part of that in some way for you to be able to replug yourself in with that conviction to your purpose and what you're doing there?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. And the other thing that really worked for me is when I was in the village, I was able to be a coach as well. I coached varsity soccer for several years, so I kept that connection. And it was really nice because the kids were able to connect with me on a more personal basis. And being a small student body, they got to see, even those that weren't in the sport, they came out to the games and they saw me in my real environment and got to see who I really was. So I would always encourage everyone, if you have anything, if you want to go in and make a difference in your community, SRO is one of those that, you're going to make that difference every day.
Yeah, no, I like that. I feel and I hear the personal connection there. I remember, that you talking about making that difference and being that role for some of these kids. Like, I think if we're real, you may be, and people listening, whether they're an SRO or whether they just engage with some kids or some students in their day-to-day in the community or the job they do, like, you have to realize that you might be the only person in their whole life that's really told them that they can be more, or they can do something, or they are worth anything. And I think when you think about that and you don't like roll your eyes at it, you're like, no, really, really, maybe no one else is really rooting for them. And
Right.
that's what it takes to have some people flip the script. That you telling about that reminded me of when I was pretty new in solo on day shift. I want to say it was my first rotation solo. And this teenager actually called himself in because he had a warrant. He had a juvenile warrant. And he called it in super vaguely, like enough that I had enough sense, right? Just being a baby cop, I had enough sense that it felt like it wasn't real. Like it felt like an ambush almost. But he said, "Hey, this warrant subject's walking down the street right by the fire station. He's wearing this, like to the T." And I'm driving by. I'm like, "Okay, how often does this come in?" It's anonymous, and then there's really nothing around there except for the fire station. And I see the kid walking, and he matches to a T. And he starts turning, and he's eyeballing. Like he keeps checking over his shoulder, and I'm like, he knows I'm here. Like he knows the caller made the call. Like what is going on? So I kind of do a double pass by him, and eventually I pull over. I'm like, "Hey man, are you such and such?" He's like, "Yeah," and he's super nervous. I'm like, "What is about to happen right now? Is he trying to prove himself?" Because that's a thing. But turned out super good kid. It's even like I pause when I say good because I'm going to keep telling the story and people are going to potentially roll their eyes, but whatever. He's a kid and he made some mistakes, right?
Right.
But he's compliant. I arrest him. And then he does tell, I'm like, "This call is weird, dude. I got a call that you're walking down the street. Did you call?" He's like, "Yeah, I called." I'm like, "Man, you had me freaked out." And I just like kind of, I break that little, shell. I'm like, "Dude, I thought I was going to get like, someone's going to pop out the bushes. All your buddies are going to come like bum rush me or something. Or you guys were trying to play something on me." He's like, "Dude, I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know I could just call." I'm like, "You can just call. You can just call, man."
Right.
But thank you for taking accountability. We had a talk all the way from, Kent to downtown Seattle. And it was a great call, right? And we had so much conversation about what circles he was hanging with, and he's staying with family and all this. And without belaboring the story too much, I felt so good. I felt so good that I kind of had made that that categorical idealistic difference that I wanted. I wanted that to be a part of my job, why I came in. And not not outside of a month, I see a space on Bulletin with a bunch of Serrano kids, right? This local little set that's set up and all these things that they're suspected of doing. And I felt so low. Like that really messed with me for a little bit because I felt like, man, I've been doing this for, a year, 2 years. And that was like the first of that kind of iconic experience I had. And then, and then his name was just always out there.
Yep.
Yeah, so I explain that because one, I want people to have their ideals. I want people to be idealistic and positive and constructive. At the same time, we have to not take things personally. We got to keep plugging in the fight, know why we're doing this thing. And I think that that's what I see in what you've shared. And you clearly demonstrate it so well. Are there things beyond you just saying like, well, there's a job to do, I'm going to do it? Or is it that plain and simple for you?
It's not that plain and simple because, it took me a while to even figure this out. When I started my career, there was, and I love saying the guy's name. He was a mentor of mine, Lance Catalano. He was with the Brown County Sheriff's Department, and he was the SRO there. And it wasn't an easy gig because in a county, we didn't have take-home cars. He had to park his car at the department. It was about a 30-minute drive from the department out to the school and everything. So, I mean, he put his time in, but he really showed me that, hey, being the SRO, you have to go in and understand that you're going to deal with kids who are going to be acting up, and they're acting up because they want to know what the boundaries are, and they're not given those boundaries at home. And unfortunately, we're the ones who have to give them those boundaries, and you build a connection with those kids when it comes to those boundaries. And that's what I found. And I think that's something that you would see too if you ever dealt with that kid again. He was probably screaming for someone to give him some direction on what to do in his life and wasn't finding it. So he'd just do stupid stuff. And I have story after story with kids that did that, and I just remember that Lance did that after I left Brown County Sheriff's Department and I went back to visit and stuff. He did it for years. He loved that position. And I think that's kind of where my passion for that SRO spot was. I wanted to be like like Lance. And I say his name, and we'll probably talk about this later, but Lance is a guy, he was 2 weeks from retirement. He was a sergeant, and he ended up committing suicide because of the job, and that's something that weighs on me. But on the other hand, I mean, I am so proud that I got to know him and that he gave me that little bit of fire to want to be a school resource officer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a gift. It's a gift that lives on with you and certainly many others.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah,
mentorship and that modeling it's priceless.
it really is. And that's the thing is, it's that mentorship. I mean, getting in this business, you have those that just want to treat all the young officers like they're dirt, right? And you have others who want to help those officers grow. I think part of the reason why when I came back to Federal Way, I didn't want to promote is I really enjoy leading from below, and showing the officers that you can still, you don't have to have bars, you don't have to have stripes, you don't have to have stars. You can be a leader without any of that, and make a difference in your department and in your community. And that's something that's just always stood with me. And I think SRO is one of those things that helped me understand that I didn't need to be a supervisor to actually be a leader.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such a theme on this show talking about leadership. And I love that we continually talk about peer leadership, but I don't think I put it in these terms. So I'm just going to go for it. But I feel it in that I think most of us are agreed that peer leadership is so crucial and important, and it's nothing to sleep on. At the same time, the effective peer leaders are the best leaders because like leadership is about followership. And if you have a rank, if you have a supervision, and you have power that compels people to follow you, then you're actually not generating the voluntary followership, right? And
Right.
so basically what I'm trying to say is that if you're a peer and you get people to follow along with what you're saying, how you're doing the job through modeling, through overt and subvertive, uh, I suppose, methods,
Mm-hmm.
then that is like that's the sauce. Like you don't have the rank to tell people what to do, but they just want to follow you. They want to be part of what you're doing.
Right.
That's a true leader.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
it truly is.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to make a flip because I do want to talk about when you were a sergeant and you said, you were kind of put in there to clean house, but not really. It was about accountability. And I think that's powerful because the point is like if the result was cleaning house, it's because people weren't going to be on board. Like people have the option, right? Hey, we're going this way, and if so and so still going that way, then they're making a choice that they don't want to be on the team doing things a certain way. But I think that's powerful because I hear it from the line level all the time. I mean, they're oftentimes crying for accountability. Like they want everyone to be of a certain standard. They want everyone to pull their weight because the job is important. And I think that that's so crucial.
Right. Yeah, and when I went into that position, we had some really great employees, some great officers who were doing some really good work, but were being held back because of some people who took the job because they felt it was an easy job they could hide. They would basically go and get a paycheck and go home and not do any work. Um, and that's where I came in. I was the one who had to make sure everyone was pulling their fair weight. I hated it when a supervisor would say, "Hey, I need you to do this because I know you'll get it done." Um, and looking over at my partner who just didn't want to do anything and wasn't getting any assignments. So it was really important for me to make sure that I held everyone accountable. I gave them the same tasks, and made sure everything was even and equal so that when it came to someone not pulling their weight, it was easy for me to document it. And I think that went a long ways with the officers that I supervised. But then it bled over too because we had um, a community service officer program, which was college students who would take over some security duties. And when I got at the university, we had 26 students that were doing that every semester. I built the program to 42 students. And I got to tell you, each and every one of those students, I think, saw the way that I led. And I would never ask them to do anything I wasn't willing to do. And when they would mess up, there was no big investigation or anything. It was normally they would come in and it was almost like they had to confess to dad what they just did. And they looked like that beat down kid having to talk to their parent,
Mm-hmm.
just apologetic. And I think it's because I gave everyone an opportunity to do what I was doing and just be that leader, stand out to be that leader, show everyone you can do what you can do. And if you mess up, I've always been a firm believer, you mess up, you come forward, you just admit it and move on, because I've always told anyone that I've supervised that, we learn from our failures. Don't be afraid to fail. People who have a hard time in life are afraid to fail. I've never been afraid to fail because I learn from each time that I fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so powerful. And I want people to focus on that, right? Like the goal is not to fail, it's to avoid it. But when you do, pick up your chips, like take the lesson, internalize it, and move on. The quicker you can move on, that failing fast. And that's something that I've not always been. Like I was probably still, I mean, a lot of this stuff's foundational, right? Like you don't just change, but a fear of failure or fear of inadequate performance is certainly like it's a driver for me. I get a lot of good stuff coming from it, but if I'm going to be efficient with my energy, I need to let go of some of that stuff. So we need to learn from the good man Donovan here. Fail fast.
And that's the thing is when I had a couple of students, when they failed and they failed pretty bad, some of them I had to let go. I let one guy go, and he came back to me a year after I let him go. And he's like, hey, I really want this job. This is what I did to correct what I did in the past. This is how I made my amends. And I brought him back on, and the guy is a successful cop right now. And I have a couple of those that, man, I had to make that uncomfortable decision of having to remove them or some sort of discipline. But it turned out to work in their benefit, that they really learned from that early so that they didn't have to find that out when they got on the job where it would be detrimental to their career. So that's why I tell recruits when they're in the academy, this is the place to make your mistakes, is in the academy. No one likes to fail in the academy. I'm not saying fail any of the final tests or anything like that. But when you're going into scenarios, when you're answering questions in class, don't be afraid to make a mistake. That's where you need to make the mistake so we can pick you up, get you in the right direction so that when you're on the road doing the real thing, you're going to be successful.
No, that's exactly it, right? Every class has those that are just, they throw themselves at the exercise. They throw their hand up with the best thing that they got. Sometimes they fall flat, right? But then you have the opposite, the people that are not initiating. They're just sitting back, and you're like, nothing bad will befall you here, right? If you can get over here in this literally safe environment where you're not taking someone's rights away and getting a lawsuit, where you're not getting physically harmed. And so, a nod to all the younger officers, and then also, the more experienced officers, like, find the confines in which you can ask those questions. And maybe it looks more like your regular training, or maybe it looks like, hey, when you're picking the sergeant's brain, you're kind of running through some weird scenarios. It's okay to not know. That's why we talk about things.
Right. And anyone who says they've seen it all and done it all in this job, they're a liar. They are an absolute liar. I tell the recruits all the time, there's no perfect way to do this job. There's no black and white. We live in a world of gray in this job, and we're always finding something new every day. And that's one thing that I love about police work, is there was something new every day, some new challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. The moment you stop learning, then that's, no one wants to wear that hat. You don't want to wear that hat.
Right.
You get complacent if nothing else. So Donovan, I gave a nod to it, but you are a gunshot survivor, and I don't mean to put you on the spot too much. And what I mean by that is, I want people to know so they can learn from your resilience. You have talked about the incident a couple times, and I don't want to pick at any of the stress there. So if you are comfortable sharing the whatever version of what happened, and really like the takeaways from that, because that was some years ago and you continue to do the job.
So, and I've told my story several times, and each time I tell it, it helps. And I take a new perspective on it. And from when I first told it to now, I've got a whole new perspective on how it's changed my life. So, it was October 31st, 2021. So Halloween, it was Sunday morning, 7:00 in the morning. I was just out on a run. I was a big runner, did marathons, half marathons. I actually did an ultra as well. And I was just out on a 6 or 7 mile run. And I came across a couple of guys who were wrapping straps around the door handle of a local business. And me being the cop, couldn't just run by. I had to stop and started calling 911 because I wanted to report this. I wanted to get the local police there. I tried to stay out of the view of them. However, anyone who runs any distances knows that when you're out running on the streets, you're normally wearing, very fluorescent clothes so you can be seen. Hiding behind a telephone pole in a fluorescent yellow sweatshirt does not work out very well. They saw me, and they packed their stuff up. They had 2 trucks there. They hopped into the trucks, which we found out later were stolen. They pulled out of the parking lot. I don't remember this. I thought they both drove away from me, but one drove in front of me, ended up shooting me in the stomach. It was just I guess it's dumb luck that he was able to just stick the gun out in my direction and hit me. He did. I feel fortunate I got shot where I got shot. It could have been a lot worse if a couple inches higher, a couple inches lower. It could have been worse. So after I got shot, there was a witness in the area who I didn't know was a witness. I thought he's the one who shot me. So I ended up running about 150 yards down the roadway, trying to find someone to help me as I'm on the phone with 911. And I was bleeding internally. But I finally got to a spot where I just couldn't go anymore. Some people stopped, and as they stopped, the Puyallup Police Department pulled up. They started taking care of me. They got the fire department there. And I was a scoop and run, and I got to the hospital. Doctor took great care of me. The trauma unit was great. They did say that it didn't look so good for me. Didn't tell me that. They said, you're going to be fine.
That's
gave
good.
Gave my wife a whole different story. And I didn't know about it for a couple of weeks. But to me, the whole gunshot, being shot, that's such a small fraction of what I've learned since then. I had issues with feeling safe and everything after that. I was checking the windows in my house and the doors in my house about every hour. Even right after surgery, I got out of the hospital 5 days after my shooting, could barely walk. And I was walking around the whole house every hour, checking the doors, checking the windows. I had a gun by my side the entire time. What I wasn't prepared for is figuring out that the old timers telling me, hey, when this happens to you, just pack it down. And at that point, it was about 26, 27 years on the job of stuff that was packed down that I didn't realize was there. And it was all starting to come up at that point. And God bless my wife. She, a week and a half after the shooting, she doesn't admit it, but I think she gave me an extra pain pill, but threw me in the car and took me off to a therapist to talk. She's like, you're going to talk one time. You have to talk to a person one time. That's all I'm asking for. After that, you make your decision. It was probably the best thing she ever did for me. It gave me the ability to talk to that therapist and figure out that, hey, things aren't okay in my head, that I need to talk more. So I continued on that path. And that's a whole journey in and of itself, the whole recovery process. Finding out that you can fire a therapist. Never knew that. Finding out that, what was really causing me the problems when we talk about the PTSI, what was my true injury for post-traumatic? Was it the shooting, or was it more? And I found out it's a lot more than the shooting that came up. So
what do you think made you open to talking to the therapist that first time, rather than being like, where did you just bring me? I didn't say anything.
It was the respect for my wife. My wife has been by my side. We started dating when I was a freshman in high school. And so she never had any idea I was going to be a cop. I think she thought I was going to be a roadie for some band or something. I don't know what she thought I was going to end up doing. So she didn't have any plans on me being a cop. And she's been by my side whenever anyone I knew lost their life in the line of duty. She was right there at the funerals with me. She was there for all the hard times. I can remember a time when I worked for the village where I had to take a child out of their home right around Christmas. And it was a kid that I dealt with over and over. And she could just tell. She just looked at me. She said, I know you're destroyed, so let's go. We're going to go buy some presents and drop them off at the place she went to. And she was at a relative's house, but it isn't where she wanted to be. So we did that. So it's one of those things that, I had to give my wife that, and I did. And again, I think every day that she did that for me, because I know she's always got the best interest, my best interest in her mind when she does stuff like that. So,
Yeah. What I hear is trust both ways.
oh yeah, yeah, a lot of
Right.
trust.
I hear she knows you intimately, always had your back, always
Hmm.
will. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to submit, or whatever word you want to use, surrender, or just open up to something that they don't want to do, they haven't done in a long time or ever.
Hmm.
But I think when you flip it to say, hey, maybe if you don't do it for you, do it for the person pulling for you,
Hmm.
or the people pulling for you. I think that's a lot of times I can bring that back down. Like, okay, is it that much of an impasse, for this moment that we can't get over that,
Yep.
or can I give it a shot?
Yeah. Yeah. And I talk about this and I say, she did great things for me. Unfortunately, the story isn't all roses and flowers, after I went to see that therapist. I mean, I did struggle, because the therapist she took me to, she's always been one that we're gonna find the best one. I don't care if insurance covers it or not. But when L&I kicked in for workers' compensation, I had to switch my therapist, and it wasn't a good fit. And that's something I never knew, that there was a fit for a therapist. I just thought you went and talked to someone and they made you better. And when I would talk to this person, um, and tell her what was going on in my head, I would say, I really think I'm going crazy. And she would just look at me, because it was via Zoom. She would look at me and she'd say, yeah, I think you are. And I'm like, this is
Ooh,
not helping me.
ooh, yeah.
Yeah. So it really took me, and I give these guys a shout out all the time. Brian Johnston at Behind the Badge, um,
Hmm.
and Diane at Blue Hero Project, uh,
Yep.
and Noel over at Stronger Families. It took them to let me know, hey, you don't have to stay with this therapist. You can get a new one. If you're struggling, you need to get a new one. I mean, it got to the point where, before I found my new therapist, that I just felt that life would be better, for everyone around me if I wasn't around. And I always tell people, I'm afraid to die. I have nightmares about dying. I don't want to die. I've never had a suicidal thought in my brain. Um, but what I didn't understand is during this time, I ended up getting pulled over by a very specific agency that patrols the interstate,
Hmm.
several times because of my driving habits. And as I was going through my recovery, my wife came into one of my sessions and I just said, I'm so thankful that I wasn't suicidal. And my wife's like, you're out of your mind. You tried killing yourself with your driving. You didn't know you wanted to kill yourself. But I got out of that car several times, bawling my eyes out because I was afraid for my life. And I never
Wow.
realized it. And then looking back, I'm like, she was 100% right. 100% right. And it just blew my mind. And that really, when and again, it takes a lot for your significant other to be that honest with you. And she was that honest with me. And it just, every time it just helped me push harder to, um, find the brighter side of life.
Yeah. I like that you highlight the fact that a provider might not be a good fit.
Hmm.
And I think it's the same, there's that adage comparing it to like a physical health doctor,
Hmm.
right? So like you hurt your knee and someone says, hey, yeah, we got to amputate that thing. Like, you're gonna be like, really? Let's get a second opinion. And I think that so much, we we're social creatures, right? And so much of you meeting somebody, you might be like, did we just become best friends? Or like, I hate your face, I don't want to
Right.
I don't want to see you ever again. So like, don't fight through that.
Right.
Separate, is it the fit or is it the experience? And then give it another chance, right?
Hmm.
Like the agency, if your culture isn't resonating with you, it might not be the job, it might be the agency, it
Right.
might be the doctor or the therapist, not the whole practice of therapy. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing all that.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's an important thing. I mean, it could have ended up, I could have just walked away from therapy altogether. And and had I done that when it wasn't working out for me, I know for a fact I would have lost my marriage, I would have lost my family, I would have lost everything, because I was literally circling the drain at that time. And my wife didn't know what to do. to get me to switch a therapist. And she gets mad every once in a while when we talk about this, because she was telling me for a long time, you can get a new therapist. And I just didn't believe her until someone from outside of our relationship had to tell me that. And that's the one thing, you know, I always tell her, you're right. You're 100% right. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I didn't listen. There are points I don't listen all the time.
Yep. No, that's true. Own it. I mean, that's going to be a theme later. That's going to be a theme later for hiring stuff. When you said things change as far as how you reflected on that experience and then the post, what are those things that change through the years as you tell it and you reflect on it?
Well, I always reflect on it. When I first talked about it, I mean, when we talked about the PTSD and everything, I really thought it was the shooting that really caused my PTSD. I didn't realize that the shooting just opened up the floodgates for everything that I was burying in my past. I mean, I spent 9 years on the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, investigating those crimes. I worked for a small village where I did all the juvenile investigations. I had to investigate sex crimes of kids that were friends with my own children. I had to do an investigation on a person who was involved in child pornography who came over to my house one night just for dinner because our kids were friends. And a lot of that stuff just got packed down. I didn't want to face it. You hear that day in and day out, and it's something that I just said, I can handle it. I can move on. Accident investigations. I mean, in federal way, I was getting called out almost every other week for a serious or fatal accident, and just looking at those bodies day in and day out, it takes a toll on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally realized that the shooting just opened up the floodgates. And I didn't realize how I was as a person through my career. I would say probably after my first 5 years in the career, I didn't know how I had changed. And now looking back on it, after going through therapy and everything, the one thing that really hit me hard was after I found the right therapist and I was on the road to recovery. My wife is like, I haven't seen this person that I'm talking to now since high school.
Wow.
You know, and there's many times I've had to apologize to my kids because I was the person that would just blow up in a heartbeat at them for the stupidest things. And I know it was because of the post-traumatic stress injury. And,
Yeah.
you know, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. It's just how you were. And it kind of kills me that they had to grow up as that's who I was.
Yeah.
So when I say that, yeah, I have a different take on it. It gives me a different take on it, you know, and I've been able to reflect as to what helped me get through that through my career. And that's a big part of Special Olympics and the law enforcement torch run, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much that you said that I think is so helpful for everyone. And one is that the big incident, you getting shot off duty, that opened up all these other things. And I think that we worked in some pretty busy, I worked in a pretty busy agency. So stuff happens, you see a lot, and you may be subjected to certain violence yourself in that type of environment. But I want people to give themselves credit, even if they work in slower departments, because over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you see a lot of, let's not even say violence, but neglect on kids. You see these really sad things, car wrecks, right? And it's a recognition that I have a couple incidents for me that were larger in my career, closer calls, dangerous. But it's not so much those. And I think that you're absolutely right. It's the accumulation of things. Like sometimes that can evoke certain things. But, just a week ago, walked by a medic rig with a kid that was choking, strangled accidentally. And there was a part of me that was like, I'm the commander, right? Like my people have it all buckled down. I talked to a couple witnesses. I just want to show up and help out a little bit. But there's a part of me that's like, don't walk by that rig. But there's a part of me that's like, I wanted to see that kid like come to. I wanted to see that kid moving, and I see his little feet, and I'm like, why did you do that? Why'd you do that? And that's like your daughter's feet.
Yep.
And it's like, and I start thinking that night about the kid's okay. So I want to share that, which is great, like amazing. It's a good day, and it was an accident, but I started thinking about all the other, kid CPR calls, and all the other sad kid calls I'd been on. And I think that I try to reflect on things, but whether or not those listening, think about that. And I'm not telling you to try to, I'm just saying, the body keeps a score, right? And so there's that book and that principle. So it's just giving ourselves grace and patience through this. I think in law enforcement, first responder work, this is not my unique perception, but you can't come out unchanged. But it doesn't mean you're ruined. It doesn't mean you're sullied. It doesn't mean you don't have value. And so, you're such a great example of that. And I appreciate you sharing that story, because that vulnerability, just being like, it's heartbreaking when your kids are like, dude, you're just kind of an angry dude. But I feel myself, like, just reviewing body cam for a homicide trial, like, seeing the victim there and dealing with a suspect. And I know I've been off my game for the last week or so. As I come home, I know I've been short. I know I've been a little bit vacant at work when people are talking about stuff. Like, my head's somewhere else, my heart's somewhere else. It's just sad. And I'm not blaming myself. I don't feel great, but I know if I do the right things, and, we'll get to now Special Olympics torch run, like, if I do the right things and feed purpose, then I know I'll get back in short time, like a couple days, right? And I'll be back to kind of my happy, bouncier self.
Right. And when I look back at it, I had to make some phone calls and make some apologies to people in my past, because, like I said, I was a coach, coach varsity soccer, and it's a close community, and there were a lot of guys that reffed my games, who are good friends of mine. And I was a coach that got ejected out of a lot of games because of my anger and my yelling at the referees. And I think I held the record in my district where I was at. And I look back and I'm like, that it really makes sense, because I had a lot of stuff bottled up. And on the other hand, I was there to protect those kids in my head. And that was the way for me to protect those kids, is when they were wronged by the referee, I needed to scream and yell at them. And I had to call these guys, and they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, man. It is what it is. I'm like, you got to understand, man, I'm picking through this, and I was wrong. I was wrong big time. And I take ownership for it. I'm never going to say that it's because of the injury. I'm going to say it was because of me. I didn't do what I needed to do. I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, but still, I needed to do something better than what I was doing. So I always take ownership. I always tell everyone, take ownership in what you did, whether you had the knowledge or not. I take the ownership. So good conversations came out of it, though, with some people. So
yeah, good conversations, whether they remember or not, good energy. And I have to venture to guess that some of your kids' parents loved it, though. Maybe some of the kids loved it.
Oh yeah, they loved it. I know that there was one time at a banquet where they gave me like a great big yellow card and red card, because that's what you get in soccer, and I was like, they gave me a count on red cards. So the parents loved it. It was kind of, they laughed at it. I look back at it. To me, it's kind of, every once in a while I get a little embarrassed about it, but it is who I was. I can't take it back. The kids turned out, I have great communications with a lot of my athletes yet that played for me. So I must have did something right.
Yeah, no, I would venture to guess that too. Let's talk about torch run, Special Olympics.
Yeah, love it. So currently I'm on the board of directors for Special Olympics Washington. And on the board of directors, it's almost 40 people from around the state, mostly the Seattle area, where we really help drive the whole direction of Special Olympics Washington. But I'm also a member of the Law Enforcement Torch Run for Special Olympics Washington. I used to be the state director. Now I just represent them on the board of directors for Special Olympics. And I've recently just volunteered. They haven't had someone to help take a leadership role on the west side of the mountains. So I've gone back to the board and taking on that as well. But the torch run is something where we go out into the communities, and our big thing is we want to just spread the message of acceptance and inclusivity. We want to make sure that those that have intellectual disabilities, that they are out there and they're having an opportunity not only to just play in sports, but that they have an opportunity to learn a leadership role. There's a lot of leadership training that goes on with some athletes who want to step up and take a leadership role. And then the other part of it is just the health of the athletes. because with the disabilities they have very specific health concerns that every doctor isn't knowledgeable on, and getting those athletes connected with those doctors is the world to those athletes. It could be someone who specializes in some sort of foot thing where they're not able to get the right insoles or something, and this doctor just knows what to do. There's issues with dentists, with eye doctors, and we're able to make those connections. So it's a great opportunity for me, and just seeing it's one thing where you can see the hard work that you put in, you can see the result, which is great.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. It's such a good event, and I've been able to participate a couple of times in more recent years. I didn't when I was younger, and I've said that many times that I wasn't doing community engagement stuff early in my career, and I nudge people at all tenures to hop in, especially if you feel uncomfortable. Like force yourself, right, and grab a buddy because it's good for your soul. Like you'll feel
Right.
it when you
Yep.
engage in these types of events, and you step outside of the enforcement role, and you just get to commune with some people that are just doing a good thing around a good cause. So I will say, if you carry the torch,
Mm-hmm.
there's some runners out there, but make sure you got some decent shoulders on you, or it's not light, as
Mm-mm.
even if, especially if you're jogging with that thing for a couple miles or what
Mm-hmm.
have you, depending on your leg, maybe a few miles, right? And and depending on what the wind's doing, you might want to raise it up pretty high because that the accelerant.
Yeah.
It's not the most pleasant thing to breathe in when you're doing cardio.
Right. It is not. There are challenges with it. It is heavy. The fuel does get a little smelly, but in the end, I mean, it pays off.
Yeah.
You bring it into the games. I don't know if you ever had a chance to go to the opening ceremony where the torch ends up.
No.
But the cheers, the high fives, the hugs you get from the athletes, they treat you like you're their hero going in there. And what everyone takes away when you go to an opening ceremony, or if officers volunteer to go out and hand out medals to the athletes at the games, the one thing they take away is that um, in no way are the law enforcement heroes to these folks. The athletes truly are the heroes. You figure out what those athletes do day in and day out, and when you look at athletics, people think, oh well, it's going to be people with intellectual disabilities out there playing. They're serious, and they are competitive, and they are great athletes.
Mm-hmm.
I got a team together from Federal Way Police Department to go out and play a flag football team from the area, Special Olympics in Federal Way. And I will tell you, we got our butts kicked. One of my friends that's on the team, Troy, great athlete, and his sole purpose was to rush the quarterback. And I can tell you, man, flag football or not, I got hit a bunch of times by Troy because he knew one speed and it was all out. I mean, great athlete. I think any football coach would want him rushing the passer
Mm-hmm.
in any league that he could play in. So you learn so much. And I always challenge officers, come out to either a regional competition or a state competition, sign up for an hour to just hand out medals at whatever event is going on. I guarantee as soon as you put a medal around someone's neck, you're hooked. You're going to be back. You've got to go back. You get involved in the torch run. You get involved in getting out at the games and just being with the athletes. We've got some officers who actually move on and they become coaches because they find that passion. It's just such a great, there's so many opportunities that are involved. And again, it's another one of those, I always say at agency level, it's a great way to start building your leadership skills.
Yeah.
Because agency wise, I mean, you try to gather officers to go out and do the torch run for a leg that's running through your agency. We might have, and they're coming back now, tip a cop at Red Robin, getting people together to just go out in your community for 4 hours and go to Red Robin and talk to people about Special Olympics. So you're always doing that recruiting at the department and building those relationships internally, but then going out and having that where you've got to have some accountability. Who's there? If you're collecting money, what's happening with that money? So you learn those little skills that people think aren't a big deal, but when it comes to promotional time, they really come into play.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just like the fluffy stuff and not just, the feel goodness. Like it's a great cause. I don't think anyone would dare dispute that, but they might say, okay, what does that have to do with me? And what I would submit to folks is that when you step outside of your day-to-day, week-to-week, you're engaging with a community that you're not commonly around, or maybe you don't know a whole lot about, whether it's the Special Olympics, whether it's this religious group, or whether it's this kids organization, you should remember that it's about exposure to yourself and openness. And we are doing a job. We're protecting an entire community and everyone within it, every single type of person, right? And so it enables us to do that better when we can see them better, when we can understand them better. So
right. It really, when you talk about communication, it just throws you in there. I mean, you deal with so many different disabilities. And some of the athletes have compounded disabilities where you're learning so much on how to communicate. It's great. But for me too, the other thing is I didn't realize how much of an impact it had until after my shooting. I mean, I was receiving emails, I was receiving cards from around the country from athletes, wishing me all the best, thanking me for doing the job. And that really opened my eyes up to how much the law enforcement, torch run, and Special Olympics meant to me.
Yeah. That's so good. Man, Donovan, we covered a lot from your career and outside of your career, but the connection I want to bring it all together is this like profound purpose and this positivity. So very much in the vein of what we talk about all the time. But thank you so much for your time. And is there anything you want to leave listeners with in this episode focused on you and your career?
To me, it's always just know what your why is when you get into this job. I know I say this on the Police Applicant podcast all the time, but don't go into this when you go into your interview and say, I want to make a difference in someone's life. Everyone says that. You got to figure out what that difference is going to be. Teaching child abuse, is that where you're going to make the difference? I teach DUI classes. Is that where you're going to make your difference? Know what your difference is going to be and be able to specify what that is. For me, it becomes Special Olympics and the torch run now.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Donovan. And where can people find you other than the Police Applicant podcast?
I'm also on Instagram. You can find me at Truth Tracker, and Tracker is spelled Traker. I'm on there, and that gives the link back over to the podcast, and then also to some of the stuff that I do for Special Olympics.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.